In this episode, we'll learn about weather forecasting. We'll go kayaking with Mark Sundin, and we'll talk about crossing dangerous coastal bars. My name's Brad Whitaker, and welcome to Marine Rescue TV. Phil Campbell headed into the Bureau of Meteorology's Sydney office to find out about weather forecasting. Let's catch up with Phil in the Sydney office.
Here today with Jane Golding, who's with the Community Services Group at the Bureau of Meteorology, and she's going to give us a backstage pass here at the Bureau to have a look at what goes on in their forecasting centre.
Let's go. Come on in.
What exactly goes on here?
Yeah, so we have a forecasting centre running in the New South Wales office. There's centres like this all around the capital cities in the country. And in those centres, there's teams of meteorologists and hydrologists issuing forecasts and warnings for the public and for emergency services. So some of those forecasts include your town forecasts, your city forecast for the weather, the wind, your temperature. Also forecasts for our marine areas, so for the boating community. So that also includes wave forecasts as well as the wind, obviously, and the weather as well. There's warnings that come out of this centre. So some of the warnings that get issued as needed include severe thunderstorm warnings, flood warnings, warnings for weather that things like east coast lows can produce. So, you know, those damaging winds and those flooding rains and the flash flooding, and also large waves, warnings of large waves and high tides come out of this centre as well.
So for the boating community in New South Wales, which is quite extensive, what sort of products do you put out for them?
Yeah, so there's a few key products of interest to the marine community. There's our coastal waters forecasts, so they extend from the coast, obviously, out 60 nautical miles, and they've got information around the wind strength and direction, the wave height, and the wind wave height and the swell wave height.
Jane, there's lots of hazards out for the boating community when they're on the water, whether it's on estuaries, rivers or out at sea. What sort of warning products are put out by the Bureau? Yeah,
so there's a range of different warning products that are of interest. Looking at the coastal waters, New South Wales is prone to long period, large and powerful waves, and there is a warning product we will put out when we're expecting those conditions. That's called a hazardous surf warning, and it's really trying to highlight those large, powerful waves, you know, that as they approach the sandbars can make boating particularly dangerous. Our marine wind warnings as well, that's another one to keep an eye out for. So once we're forecasting the wind to go through that strong wind strength, which is 25 knots, we'll be highlighting those conditions through the marine wind warning. Yeah, there's a few dangerous weather systems that affect the New South Wales coast that we're keeping an eye out for all the time. So east coast lows and coastal troughs, that's one of them. They're particularly east coast lows. Really dangerous systems, can produce some really strong winds, often up to storm force, flooding rain, large waves that'll erode our beaches of all their sand. And if they coincide with a high tide as well, like that exacerbates the situation, and we'll get inundation into low-lying areas. But over the water, it's quite treacherous because of the winds and the waves.
We often talk about carrying safety gear on your vessel, but what about a paddleboard or a kayak? Let's catch up with Mark Sundin and talk about how he prepares for a voyage on his kayak.
Before we head out on a paddle, we check the forecast. We check the wind strength, we check where it's coming from. Nowadays with weather apps, you're able to see often when there's a wind change coming and how strong and where it's going to come from. So as a guide, that gives you a fair indication of the sort of weather you're going to be experiencing out on the sea. Having checked all of the weather forecasts and the elements, we let somebody know where we're going and when we're expected back. We're carrying communications. So as a first line of defence, a marine VHF radio. We've checked the battery before we leave to make sure that it's working, and we're familiar with the protocols. Marine rescue, marine rescue, marine rescue. This is Expedition Kayaks, Expedition Kayaks, Expedition Kayaks. on channel 16, over. I'm carrying my mobile phone in a waterproof pouch. It's got a membrane that allows me to use the phone from the seat of my kayak when my fingers are wet. But as an extra precaution, I've dialed Marine Rescue before I leave. I hit dial and then I hit end, so that's the last number in my phone recorded. I unlocked the phone, so if I'm in a situation where things have gotten out of hand, I don't have to go fumbling around trying to find a number and activate a phone with a wet hand. As a last resort, I'm carrying a personal locator beacon. This is the Cavalry. It goes directly to AMSA, will alert the authorities as to where I am. I've registered it with AMSA. They know the craft I'm in. The people that I've nominated as my ground crew, told them where we're going. They know what I was in and where I was going. They'll be called when this beacon goes off, which will facilitate a faster rescue by their resources to do so. This has to be sitting up high with the aerial pointed at the sky. I understand how to use it. There's no point having a PLB if you don't understand how it works. And finally, when the rescue craft arrive, I'm carrying a day flare. Today's a day, I'm not out at night. As you can see, I've pulled all of these safety devices out of my life jacket. This is an approved Type 3 PFD. It's modified to make paddling easier, but it does two things. Because it's a personal flotation device, it greatly assists me to float if I did find myself separated from my craft, and it's quite visible. People can spot them. As you can see, I'm also wearing very visible clothing. I'm easy to spot.
Conditions on New South Wales waterways can change quickly, especially if you're crossing a coastal bar. Let's get some tips and tricks off Michael Guest for crossing coastal bars.
G'day, it's Michael Guest here from my mates at Marine Rescue New South Wales to talk a little bit about New South Wales bar crossings. Now, it's a super dangerous situation, or it can be anyway, so there's a few factors that you need to take into consideration. A, it's compulsory to wear a PFD when you cross New South Wales coastal bars. B, keep an eye on the tide, so that last of the run-out tide, especially when you have onshore breezes like we do. Summertime, you get a lot of nor'easterly breezes further up the coast, southeasterly breezes on that tide as it runs out. Certainly some of our narrower systems get those big pressure waves. Try and avoid those areas if you can. So have a really good look at your tide charts, and especially on those marginal bars, try and time your trip with an incoming tide if you can, if possible anyway, so that you're coming back in on that incoming tide and going out on an incoming tide. That's one thing for certain. Make sure that your boat is totally up to standard with all the safety gear that you need, EPIRBs. Make sure you're full of fuel, make sure your batteries are charged, make sure your engine has been serviced. You cannot afford to have any sort of situation where your batteries are a bit suspect or you run out of fuel mid-bar. Whenever you're going to cross a bar, make a decision, get some local knowledge if you can, pick the right line, and away you go. Don't have that bow trimmed too high. Certainly when you're going up the face of a wave, you don't want that bow roaring up too far. And on the other hand, when you're coming back in, so you've got the sea behind you, make sure that you don't have any trim tabs or your engine trimmed down. You want nice bow height when you come back in. Pick a wave, sit in behind it and just follow that wave in. And of course, the one thing we're really got to do is make sure that you log on and log off with Marine Rescue New South Wales, either via your marine radio or via the Marine Rescue New South Wales app. Stay safe on the water, and don't forget, support your local volunteers at Marine Rescue New South Wales.
Well, we hope you enjoyed those 3 segments on weather forecasting, preparing for a voyage on a kayak, and crossing a coastal bar. Don't forget to log on and off with Marine Rescue whenever you head out on the water, and most of all, stay safe on the water.